All right, I think we will begin here. I want to welcome everyone who's joining us today, this beautiful afternoon in Lodi, California, or hopefully a beautiful evening wherever you are. My name is Stuart Spencer, and I'm the Executive Director for the Lodi Winegrape Commission. We are the trade association representing the Lodi area winegrape growers and winemakers. And today, we're going to have an engaging discussion on old vines in Lodi and what makes them special and why we need to keep them in the ground and why you as wine lovers should be seeking them out. I'm joined with a group of experts on the subject that I will introduce here shortly that are going to be sharing their perspectives. In my upper left corner here, I'm not sure what it is for you guys, is with the beard is Mr. Kevin Phillips from Mckay Vineyards. Kevin has a great deal of experience with old vines, Zinfandel, as well as Senso and some others that he will be sharing his thoughts. Across from me over here is Jeff Perlegos, who is also one of our growers and is an advocate for old vines in Lodi and is promoting those to winemakers all over California and bringing them here to Lodi. And then beneath me is Mr. Tegan Passalacqua, as Kevin aptly called him, the mayor of California wine country. But Tegan is professional job is the winemaker for Turley wines and his own brand, which is Sandlands. And I think Tegan knows more about old vines and the history of them in California than anyone I've come across. And he's always a wealth of information to share on the subject. But quickly, before we get into the wines, we have 6 wines we're going to cover. We're going to use those kind of as talking points of what makes Lodi an old vine special. But I want to just give a brief overview of the region for those that may be, new to it, or this is one of your first experiences with it. So, Jenny, if you quickly want to bring up the slides of the presentation, and we're going to start with kind of an aerial view of the area. And I think there's a couple of things that are really critical to understand about the region that is why we have wine grapes growing here, and they've been growing here since the 1850s. And the first thing I think is the climate, which we really need to address. And you've got to understand where Lodi is positioned in California. And as you look here on this map, we're directly east of the San Francisco Bay and just down the mountains from the Sierra Nevadas. And so when you look at a map of the whole state of California, there's 2 mountain ranges, the coastal ranges that meet at the San Francisco Bay. This mountain range basically runs the whole western coast of the United States, but the major gap in those mountain ranges is at the San Francisco Bay. And out in the ocean to the west of San Francisco, you have one of the coldest ocean currents in the world that comes out of Alaska and down the coast of San Francisco. And so during the growing season, as temperatures rise in the greater Central Valley, air is heated up and must rise, and air needs to come beneath that and replace that air as it's heated up. And it comes directly off the San Francisco Bay, directly off the ocean, and across the San Joaquin River Delta, and then kind of hits the Lodi region and fans out in the valley. So we are blessed with this beautiful cooling temperatures throughout the growing season, and it's why now you see all these windmills just to the west of us as they're trying to generate power. And you create this really idyllic climate. The couple of things to keep in mind about that is both Sacramento and Stockton, Sacramento to the north of us and Stockton to the south of us, are inland seaports. So ocean-going vessels come all the way in and dock in those cities to load cargo to go all around the world. We've even had whales swimming up the San Joaquin Delta, and a few years ago there was a sea lion got caught trying to cross I-5. I don't know what he was actually doing there, but clearly we have coastal influence here in Lodi. So the climate is really one of the key factors that distinguishes Lodi that you don't see when you go north and south of Lodi. The second thing I think that's really important is obviously the soils, and as it relates to old vines, we'll get into this discussion more. is, you know, the alluvial waters coming out of the Sierra Nevada really form the soils that form the Lodi appellation. And particularly, we're going to be discussing the McCullomy River AVA and Clements Hills. And McCullomy River is granitic-based sandy soils that came out of the Sierra Mountains, floodwaters over, you know, thousands, if not millions of years, deposited it in this rich sandy area that has allowed old vines and own-rooted old vines in particular to survive for many years. So today, those are the two geographical features I think are important to understanding the region. This map here in front of you showcases the 7 AVAs of the area. The original Lodi area was established in 1986 and then divided up into the 7 AVAs. The vast majority of the old vines are located in the McCullomy River AVA. Although Jeff, we're going to be sharing a wine from one of his vineyards that comes from Clements Hills that actually I think is a bit of a sand deposit up there as well. And this is where the bulk of the sandy soils are in the McCullomy River. And so without further ado, I think it's time we move on and start discussing some of these unique vineyards and wines. And, you know, at the Winegrape Commission, and myself in particular, you know, we find these vineyards and the breadth of them to be something special for the area that's worth cherishing and it's worth telling the world about. And so, you know, our hope is that everyone comes out of this with a better appreciation for it, that there could be some winemakers out there that want to come to Lodi and source some beautiful vineyards, and that the customer is willing to buy these wines at a price point that warrants paying the growers more so that they can continue to farm them. But the first wine we're going to discuss tonight is the Michael David Winery 2018 Bechtel Vineyard Senso. And I'm gonna turn it over to Kevin to tell us first about the vineyard, because I think it is truly one of California's unique vineyards that is worth talking about. And then secondly, we'll talk a little bit about Senso and the wine. So Kevin, why don't you take it away?
Right on. Well, thank you for having me, and appreciate it. And this is a subject that is very important to me. It's something I care very much about. And this particular vineyard, the Bechtel Senso that we'll be tasting, it's a very special vineyard. It's unique even among all sorts of old vines and history. It is unique in many ways. The primary way being that it's Senso. I mean, as far as I know, there's no other old vine Senso in the entire appellation. I haven't even heard of any old vine Senso in the rest of the state. And there's very little old vine Senso in the entire world. So this vineyard, at least to my knowledge, and I think to most anybody else's knowledge, is the oldest living representation of Senso in the world. So that just kind of gives it a unique status on its own. And then there's just a lot of other cool aspects to go with it. It's dry farmed. It's organic. It's sustainably farmed. It's a 25-acre block on the west side of Lodi and the McCullomy River appellation. It is in a complete and total sand pit. I mean, these roots. We did a media tasting there, I don't know, 10 years ago or something now. We dug some soil pits just to show everybody what these roots did. I mean, and we got 30 feet down and we stopped digging, but you could see you could see active roots throughout that entire profile. I mean, it's a pure sand pit. As I said, we dry farm this, but at the end of the year, I do give it a really nice drink of water. And so after the grapes have been harvested, we give it a furrow irrigation with a nearby irrigation canal that's directly supplied from the McCullomy River. So this is pure ocean snowmelt water. But we irrigate this vineyard, and so we put on average the equivalent of 4 acre feet. So that would mean if we put sides on the vineyard and put a floor on the vineyard so the water couldn't percolate down, that vineyard would be 4 feet high, full of water. That's how much that's how much water that we give that vineyard. But what's amazing is when we finish the irrigation, a day later, you can walk across that field and not even get your boots muddy. You know, it is just, it's a very, very sandy patch, and it's just it's a great water percolation zone, you know, of which many exist on the west side of Lodi, but that one may be one of the sandiest ones that I know.
So just to clarify, Kevin, you're irrigating it after everything's done harvesting, and you're just giving it basically a flood irrigation, like a good thorough rain almost.
That is correct. So this vineyard would technically count as a dry farm vineyard in regards to in terms of the wine and the grapes being produced out of it. It gets no water other than the natural rain that it gets you know, throughout the growing season. But after harvest, every year we do give it one nice drink of water, and I think it's been a very big contributor in terms of bringing this, you know, help keeping this vineyard healthy and strong. You know, I mean, it was planted in 1886, and this thing is still going strong. And in fact, since we've taken this over, I mean, we've actually seen the yields, you know, come back up and increase to the point that now quite often I have to go through that vineyard and actually have to thin off grapes, you know, to make Tegan happy.
So Tegan, you've been working with this vineyard for a number of years yourself. Why don't you tell us your thoughts on this particular Bechtel vineyard, Senso? You got to unmute, so.
So we started working with the Senso Vineyard the year Kevin took it over in 2008. Kevin, I think you had shown me the vineyard in 06 or so, and then you took it over in 08, and we bought 5 tons, and then we kind of increased very rapidly, where I think we get about 25 tons from the vineyard right now. And it really is a treat of all the vineyards we work with. It's, you know, neat to work with something that is, you know, more or less the dodo bird of California viticulture, where there was a lot more Black Malvasia or Senso planted. There is one other old patch in Dry Creek Valley. A winery called Frick has a couple acres in Dry Creek Valley, I think planted in the early 50s of Senso. But, you know, I was lucky enough to work in the Swartland of South Africa and work with some old Senso there, and makes amazing wines there. But everyone who's come out from South Africa or France to Lodi, I mean, everyone falls in love with the vineyard. The work that Kevin's done in the vineyard's been pretty impressive to, you know, I think with vineyards like that, you really need to treat it like a family heirloom, you know, and it's not that it's an old chair that you trash, but it's something that you take care of. And, you know, you yell at people if they're abusing it, and you know, he's really dialed it in, and it's healthy. And, you know, we actually take the section, I think, that is of the red section, we take the section that produces the most fruit, but it's also to the west side of the vineyard. And for some reason, I like the vigor there better. You know, when Kevin took it over, like the shoots were pretty stunted. I remember one year that, you know, the fruit was like 22.5 bricks, and the shoots, I don't know, Kevin, were like 12 inches long. And we were like, how does that canopy ripen the clusters? You know, it was kind of one of those things, like everything you learn about viticulture and sugar accumulation, there wasn't enough solar panels on the vine to ripen and maintain acidity, but this vineyard did it. And I think it, you know, it speaks more to the actual structure of the vines, the root system that exists. And one of my favorite things, you know, everyone's so impressed by the look of the vineyard. And if you read old viticulture books, you know, in 1886, there were not a lot of viticulturists in California, but there were a lot of arborists. And in Sicily, they call head trained vine arborello, which meant a little tree. And the oldest vineyards up in the Sierra foothills and the oldest vineyards in Lodi, you know, were planted more like an arborist would plant a fruit tree than a viticulturist would plant a grapevine, you know, and everyone's like, wow, they look like these little trees. And I think that speaks to the history of California and kind of what you had and who was farming and planting these vineyards. They weren't people with viticultural past. They were, you know, kind of pioneer people who had learned to grow, fruit trees and kind of got into grape growing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because, yeah, I guess in other parts of the world, it's more the goblet style of pruning that you would see on head-trained vines. But here you do see these little trees. And even if you go back to the flame-toed days, those were sold as table grapes originally, which is a fruit. And many of those were pruned in a way, like you're saying, like almost a small tree.
Right.
They were quite big. So Kevin, this wine, the Michael David Senso, one of the things that's always struck me about this vineyard and the wines coming from it is how pretty they are, and it was kind of ran counterclockwise to some of the historical stylistic version of Michael David wines, and can you speak to kind of the evolution of Michael David with this vineyard and this wine?
Yeah, we've been, well, we started buying the fruit actually back in 2003. And it was, I think it was the next year that, or it might've been that year that it was figured out that vineyard was actually, that it was Senso. But from, till about, I think it was 2009 was our first vintage where we were actually using the wine in a Rhone blend. And then, so from 9 on, we started making, single vineyard bottlings, which was not really not our MO, and we really didn't have single vineyard bottlings, but we started making them with this vineyard. And there'd been an evolution kind of in the style though as well. I mean, Michael David it's known more for, make your really bigger large wines. And this wine, he initially kind of started that way, but there has been an evolution that this wine and as our winemakers have evolved with it, it's changed, and it's become this lighter, fruitier style. The wine gets partial carbonic maceration. And so this wine is, especially for Michael David, it's a very unique product for us. But I think that's just this vineyard is so special, and everybody's on that same page where it's like you really want to let this vineyard you want to let it show itself, and it doesn't take a lot of manipulation to get it that way. So, I mean, it's one of the few wines that, of our red wines that sees oak, but it only sees neutral oak. It's the only wine we do that has carbonic maceration. One of the very few wines that we pick that's under 24 bricks. So, I mean, this wine is just kind of it's the entire it's the complete opposite end of the spectrum of what is typical for us.
To your credit, I think, you guys have, since you've taken over farming it, you are allowing a bunch of other winemakers, in addition to Turley, to purchase grapes from it too. And so how many different winemakers on average are sourcing from this vineyard?
On average, on a given year, it's going to be somewhere in the realm of 16 to 18 buyers. I mean, there's quite a few different buyers out there. It's when it comes time to harvest, it is or as we get close to the harvest season for this, which is typically the first red grape to be picked in Lodi. I mean, it's kind of like Game of Thrones. I mean, I call it Game of Vines, but all of a sudden you get these different winemakers and they start vying for trying to get more, and they start, there's designated sections for each winemaker out there, and a lot of these are very small winemakers, and sometimes there's years where they, for whatever, financial reasons, they can't absorb their whole section, but they're making side deals with other winemakers too. That way they don't lose their section. It's pretty funny the way the whole buying pool has evolved out there. I mean, it's you've kind of got 3 main branches. You've got the the Turley files that have been through Tegan, and he's introduced to that vineyard, and so you have a branch of buyers that are directly related to Turley or interact with Tegan. There's a whole nother branch of buyers that are from the historic from Bonnie Doon, who has always had a real affinity for this vineyard with Randall Graham. And then you got your locals, you know, your Jesse's Grove, who actually owns the vineyard, and a whole slew of other related or locally related winemakers. You know, I mean, it's funny. In fact, even all of the wines that we're trying up here tonight, I can give you a connection to the winery up here and its connection to the Senso. So it's just this vineyard, let's say, it gets around a little bit.
This is the strange family tree of California viticulture and winemaking, I guess.
It's
well,
very
good.
Sixth-generation Lodi family, you know. The relations really blur.
I mean,
yes.
I went through all the wines last night, and the only, you know, I mean, these are all locals, with the exception of Turley, and then the Maitre de Chai. And I wasn't sure who that was. It was a winery that I wasn't familiar with. So I looked it up, and lo and behold, Alex Pitts is one of the owners of that, and you know, and makes the Stampede Zin from Jeff's vineyard. But Alex actually knows this vineyard very well because he interned with Abe Schoner and Scolium Project for many years, and Abe has been a longtime buyer of the vineyard. So it's just funny. It kind of shows the almost the incestuous nature of this vineyard and how many people get their mitts on it.
Well, it's a reflection, I think, of the community and everyone willing to work together to help each other. And credit goes to Michael David for sharing the vineyard, and to Tegan for helping bring people to it and bring people to Lodi. We got to move on because we got 5 more wines to talk about and a lot more to discuss. So we're going to move on actually to the Stampede Vineyard from Maitre de Chai that Jeff grows the vineyard. And so Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about the vineyard and what you and your brother are doing out there.
Great. Well, thank you for having me first and foremost, Stuart. So Stampede Vineyard is located in the Clements Hills AVA of Lodi, which is out pretty far east in the greater Lodi AVA. It is, when we bought the vineyard, it was basically 18 acres planted. There's about 20 acres planted today. There was a small fallow section that we added to about 3 years ago. It is an own-rooted vineyard, planted 10 by 10, but it's not planted directly in a square pattern. So it's planted north and south, but east and west. So if you look directly to your east or to your west, there isn't a vine there. It's a little bit to a diagonal. It's actually planted in a diamond pattern. But it is an own-rooted, mostly Zinfandel vineyard. There's quite a bit of Mission interplanted, and there's a little bit of Mourvèdre. There's 3 or 4 vines of Senso actually, and a smattering of other things. Let's call that the original planting. We've supplemented that with some Alicante Bouschet and Grenache mostly. It was planted first. It was probably planted in 3 phases, best we can tell. The first phase was planted in the 1920s, so it's what we believe to be a Prohibition era vineyard. Second planting probably in the late 20s or early 30s, and then prior to us having the honor of farming the vineyard, it was in a different family, the Lane family, and it was in that family for over 70 years. The previous change of hands of the vineyard was in 1940 actually. So we believe the last third of the vineyard was planted in the 1940s. Now the soils on the vineyard are kind of atypical of what you normally find in Clements Hills. Clements Hills, you find kind of this red, rocky, gravelly soil. We're pretty close to the Mokelumne River, as Mokelumne River comes from the Sierras down and basically makes a hard right at Tegan's vineyard. And so we're really on this kind of a sand squirt that kind of hugs the entire kind of, north and south of the McCallum River as it goes through the Clements Hills AVA. That's not to say the entire vineyard is uniform. The very north end, very south end, pretty sandy, basically typical, exactly the same as you would find in closer to Lodi. But the middle, the middle half or the middle 2/3 of the vineyard is pretty loamy. There's a lot more clay, a little bit more rock. It does differ though from Lodi proper in that it's not very flat. There's a lot of dips and swells and undulations. It's not a mountain by any stretch of the imagination, but it is. There is a lot of there's a lot of slope to the vineyard, and it'd be pretty hard to for irrigate the vineyard.
So it's interesting here that some of this vineyard was planted in the 20s, which is during Prohibition, that the people were planting these grapes here in Lodi, and Tegan is Mr. California Viticulture. Why were people planting vineyards in Prohibition here in Lodi?
Well, they were selling grapes to make home sacramental wine. A lot of people think that the white Zin saved Old Vine Zinfandel what it did, but I mean Prohibition actually helped with a lot of plantings of Zinfandel, which primarily stayed local, and then the mixed blacks that were shipped more outside of the state. But I think each person was allowed to make about 3 barrels of wine a year. So there were a lot of home winemakers, and that was kind of Lodi was the hub of shipping grapes to the East Coast. So and one of the stories I've also heard is that people wanted to get grapes as early as they could back to the East Coast. So Mediterranean areas like Contra Costa and Lodi were actually preferred by the home winemakers because they wanted to get things. They were impatient to get going with making wine. And I think, part of that is if fermentations, and if you have, a cellar or basement, if you're on the East Coast and you're fermenting, in October, November, it's hard for the yeast to be happy and, down in a basement, where if you get grapes, more in early September, it's still warm and the yeast kind of want to get going and do their thing, and you get ferments to finish.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the vineyard, they would sell the grapes for. Back in the day, there was a company, Louis DeLuca, that would buy at least, our vineyard, and there was hundreds more, I'm sure, around town. But yeah, that's exactly what they were used for shipping back east.
So this particular wine, I mean, you've got a bunch of winemakers out there now. How many winemakers were purchasing grapes from this vineyard this year?
This year, I mean, just roughly, I'd say about 8 different winemakers. Locally, Fields family has been with us since the very first year. We sold some to Craig Harmeyer at Harmeyer Wine Cellars, Maitre Duché, of course, the wine that we're going to be sampling today. A little bit of it went down to Santa Barbara to Drake Whitcraft, his winery there. Some to Sonoma to Jennifer Reichart at Raft. And I know I'm going to be forgetting somebody, but some went to Mountain Tides as well. And there's a few other. Driscoll Wine Company is another one. And we've worked with Scholium in the past, and of course Bedrock in the past really kind of put us on the map, working with those.
So tell us about the Maitre Duché.
Yeah, so typically, most of the winemakers, I think, that seek out the vineyard, seek it out because we feel we can achieve, fairly, ripe to fairly ripe flavors at low alcohol and high acid. So typically the vineyard picks out, like for instance, this vineyard, this wine was picked at, I believe, 22 or 23 bricks at pH 3.3, I think in late August beginning of September in 2018. There's a particular spot in the vineyard that these gentlemen like. It's kind of in the middle, but right on the east. It kind of hugs the line with the property line with the Clements Stampede rodeo grounds, of which the vineyard is kind of where it gets its name, obviously. And I know they do a lot of think they do some carbonic maceration. I know they do a lot of whole cluster and even some barrel fermentation from what I understand as well. So it's kind of a mix, I think, of those three fermentation styles, put together. So, but the emphasis really, again, is on, kind of lower to medium alcohol and fairly, substantial acid.
Yeah, I think one of the misperceptions that exists in circles where they don't know Lodi wine very well is the belief that, a Lodi wine has to be a big alcohol fruit bomb style. And I think, we're starting to see those are stylistic choices more than they were what the vineyards can do. And I think what I'm seeing more and more of is that, Lodi can make really pretty wines at low sugars, and you still have this beautiful fruit flavor without, a greenness that you may have in some other areas at the lower sugars. And so I think we're seeing a lot of reds coming to market now from Lodi that have this prettiness to them.
Right. Yeah. And the vineyard is kind of, if you look at it on the map, it's pretty much halfway, or it's actually closer to the Amador County. It's actually closer to Amador County than it is Lodi proper. But let's just call it halfway between the foothills and Lodi. So there is this kind of blend, I think, of the two. I think we do get the fruit that you expect to find from, Lodi fruit. But we can get some of that acidity and tannin development that you normally associate with Amador or mountain fruit. So kind of a happy medium.
So you and your brother have bought 2 old vineyards in over the last decade or so, and what makes old vines special for you and your family, and why do you think they're worth investing in?
Yeah. Well, personally, I'm kind of like a nostalgic person. I like old things. I love old pictures. I love old movies, stuff like that. And so, we grew up on an old vine vineyard as well. And really, all we've ever farmed is head trained. But I don't know, we're just attracted to that way of farming. If you will, it's a different farming style. I'm sure we'll talk about it, but there's just something very attractive to us about something that's really, old and fragile, and you have a lot of respect for, kind of like you respect your grandparents in a way. You have that kind of respect for something that's seen so many more years, so many more summers than you've ever seen or ever hoped to see.
Yeah, I can't remember if Tegan said this while we were on this or before, but he referred to them as family heirlooms that are worth protecting, and
Absolutely.
It's good to see you guys making this kind of commitment. Let's move on to the next wine, which is the Mckay Vineyards, True Luxe Vineyard, and Mike Mckay is one of our local winemakers, who I think is making 4, 5, 6 different old vines in from the Lodi, or has over the last, decade. And he is partnered with one of our other growers, Keith Watts, on this, what he calls True Luxe. And for the life of me, I can't remember the origin of the name, but it's really probably not relevant to the discussion. But let's move on to the picture of the vineyard.
Kevin, wasn't this one of the original Michael David 7 Deadly vineyards?
No, it was never one of the originals, but it was part of the. 7 Deadly turned into 70 Deadly pretty quickly,
right?
Back in the day. But it did get scooped into the fold relatively early on. I think we started buying grapes from this vineyard in maybe around 07, something like that.
Okay.
So this is a Zinfandel vineyard. It actually just sits down the road from Michael David, just east of them on Highway 12 on the west side of Lodi. And, one of the things that's distinct about this vineyard is this kind of ladder style pruning system that they developed here. I believe this vineyard was planted in the 1940s. And it's on a St. George rootstock. And, want to flip to the next slide, please. And you can see this is Mike Mckay, and you can see Mike's not 3'2". He's actually about.
He's like 5'4", right?
Yeah. He's one of our smaller grape growers. No, but this is Mike, and he's not a short person. So you can see this distinct ladder pattern that is out there in this vineyard. And there are lots of different kind of approaches to it. I'm not quite sure what the origin of this kind of method was, but Tegan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think historically, I mean, in California viticulture, it's known as the Lodi ladder, right? I mean, it's a vertical cordon. I mean, I think it's a really neat way of training grapevines, because I think it develops specifically out here for the climate, to handle the wind, get things, to kind of spread out the vigor, so you could, cross cultivate vines with the tractor, and you could, pass and do your sulfurings without breaking arms by keeping the head compact going up high. And I think, it is one of those things bringing out growers, and, from around the world. They're always wanting to, stop and take photos of, the Lodi ladder. Cause to me, it's a nice way of representing like the California bounty of the Northern Central Valley. It's just this, like, look at that. It's, a really impressive way to grow grapevines, and it works really well.
So this vineyard is on St. George rootstock, and many of the older vineyards we have here in Lodi are own rooted, but there are a few of the really old ones that are on St. George. And Tegan, if you want to just give a brief kind of thoughts on St. George versus own rooted as it relates to Lodi.
Well, I think, there are very few places in the world that you can continue to grow vines on their own roots, and Lodi is one of them due to the sand content, but I believe it's more the silica that's in the sand that is an irritant of phylloxera than actually the sand itself. But it is well-draining soil that has a high silica and quartz base from the Sierra foothills, and I like to describe it of the actual formation of California with the Central Valley and the Sierra Nevadas lifting up. That lift of the Sierra Nevadas that they talk about created its own climate, which then eroded all of this granite that's in the Sierra Nevadas. That erosion of the granite, so the actual formation of California, created an environment that you could grow vines without planting them on rootstock. Now there is, the issue of nematodes, that own-rooted vines can succumb to. And you see more nematodes in areas that have more clay or loam content, but there have been nematode issues. And, I think St. George was tried by few people early on. A lot of the reasons why people didn't want to plant on rootstock was because rootstock costs money, and people didn't want to pay for every vine when they could take cuttings and, have their own nursery. And I believe, realistically, I think you see most of the vines planted on St. George in Lodi were kind of post-World War II plantings, kind of in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And then kind of in what would you say, Kevin, the 60s, 70s, you start to see freedom come into play, kind of mid-late 60s?
Yeah, definitely.
And, freedom was developed again because it actually was pretty, phylloxera resistant, but also nematode resistant. And, that's kind of, the thing is, everyone in the world wants to make wines from own-rooted vines. Anyone who doesn't want to admit that. And, it really, to me, more than anything, you can find a rootstock in any region in the world that can grow Pinot Noir well. Like if you want to grow Pinot Noir, but realistically, there are very few places in the world that should grow Pinot Noir. And historically, those places could grow them own-rooted. Lodi can grow Zinfandel on its own roots very, very well, which to me tells me that variety is suited for there. And again, any region you go through California and throughout the rest of the world, you can find now a rootstock that can be compatible with the variety. And that variety, in theory, is not compatible to the soil or the climate, but with the rootstock marriage, you can make that, you can force that on it. But when you see how well Zinfandel does on its own roots in Lodi, it to me shows as much as anywhere in the world that it's a variety that's really suited to the place and does really well in that place.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's this one is on St. George rootstock, and St. George is also used for it has a high drought tolerance, so it tends to mine water very well. So these vines tend to be more vigorous when you look at a St. George rooted vineyard in Lodi than an own rooted one if they're planted near each other.
And I will say that, you know, outside of Lodi and the Sierra foothills, 99% of Zinfandel is planted, old vine Zinfandel is on St. George. You know, outside, I mean, all of Napa and Sonoma, all of Mendocino, you know, that Zinfandel is on St. George. There's a couple vineyards down in Paso Robles that are on their own roots that are, you know, lucky because of the high lime content. But I mean, primarily when you drink old vine Zinfandel from California, it's on St. George.
So we got a question that's coming in, and they're wondering if old vines require more care or less. And why don't we let Kevin speak up here? So
the question, just to repeat, do the old vines require more care or less?
yes, and I'll let you define more or less. Is that more time, energy, cost? You know.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt that they require more care. I mean, it's kind of like a grandparent that's a little bit senile. You got to do a lot to take care of them and make sure they got caregivers and stuff. The old ones, they require so much hand labor.
Hey, Kevin, that's because you're dealing with 18 winemakers. That's why it requires more care.
Well.
Left him speechless.
You asked me about old vine. You didn't ask me about winemakers, which also require their own set of care and massaging. But old vines, I mean, when it's said and done, I mean, there's just no doubt about it. Old vines are a pain in the ass. I absolutely love them. I adore them. You know, I walk the Bechtel vineyard more than any other vineyard that we have, and I don't even own it. But you know, I love old vines, but they do require a lot more care. They require a lot more passes in the vineyard with crews. And that's not to say that they actually cost more in terms of farming, because a lot of old vine vineyards, there's certain costs that you don't have that you do have with, you know, with trellis vineyards, and a lot of that repair and maintenance that goes with trellis vineyards, those are not inherent in old vines. So they actually do, you can farm them a little bit cheaper, but you do farm them with a lot more work and a lot more efforts.
And not just that, but you know, older vines are just physically bigger, and so when they're physically bigger, they tend to stick out in the tractor row a lot more. So that's why, you know, a lot of times the arch enemy of an old vine is a tractor. I mean, it is for any vineyard, right? Any vine, but especially for old vines, they're just so physically out there. Arms are breaking off. Sometimes you could, if it's sandy enough, you could just lean on an old vine and it'll just start to tip over. Yeah.
Well, and I'd like to disagree just with, you know, farming in Napa and Sonoma. Most of our vineyards planted there are tighter spacing than you find. Like most of the old vines in Lodi are 435 vines to the acre, where I think the average Napa vineyard is probably 1,200 to 2,000 vines an acre. So the beauty to me of old vine and head trained old vines is that, you know, you don't have 3 catch wires and you don't have all the shoot positioning and leafing. Like the vines actually do it more naturally on themselves. And, you know, we all know when you walk up to that old vine and it just like, you've pruned it and you haven't even suckered it, and you look at it, you go, wow, like there's really nothing to do there. It just looks perfect. And, you know, it's rare. You know, the thing I love about, you know, I think the care is, it's interesting. I would go and say there's more care in old vines, but there's more manipulation and passes in trellis vineyards. You know, you're always like tinkering, trying to make it the way you want it, where with old vines, you kind of sit back and kind of say, what do you need? Like, and you kind of, you know, do a little shoot thinning here or there, and you're like, wow, it looks perfect. But the care is there. It's just the amount of passes and touches in modern vineyards with drip irrigation and catch wires and tees.
So to that point, Tegan, then would you say an old vine is more reflective of its spot than a younger vine that's going through a lot more manipulation.
I think so. I mean, I think that's, and I think part of it is, you know, head training and minimal irrigation or dry farming. You know, you really see a vineyard, you know, I'm a big fan, and it's not always a commercial thing, but I'm a big fan of vintage variants, primarily when it's a good thing, but it's really neat to taste the wine, you know, from a drought year after you've sold the wine and you've like survived financially, and you like taste it, you go, wow, this wine's so concentrated, you know, and it's like, it's nothing that we did in the cellar. It's just like, wow, that's an amazing wine that's a reflection of, you know, and it's how people talk about pre-chemical farming fruit, where it's like, you can't taste the tomato like that anymore. You know, that was a dry farm tomato that's just so constant. And I feel like when you connect with that in a wine from a vintage, and you kind of you know, it brings you back to a vintage like 2004 that was a drought year and hot, and you're like, I remember that year when everything was harvested, you know, in August. To me, that's the, you know, one of the neat things. And I feel like you get more of that with old vines than with younger vines. You get more of a vintage signature, but you also get a vineyard signature as well.
Good. So let's, in that vein, we're going to move on to your wine, which is the 2018 Cherryhouse Vineyard from Turley Wine Cellars. That, and I'll let you tell us a little bit about the vineyard.
So the vineyard is on the east side of Lodi, just a mile north of the town of Victor, right where Bruella Road, that, you know, kind of the hub of Eastern Lodi wine growing, kind of pre-Prohibition. It was, you know, Victor was and still is a small little German industrial town, 3 miles to the east of Highway 5 or Highway 99. And it's just this little German town called, you know, there's still a few people that call it Victor in the town, but less and less as the years go by. And the vineyard was planted in 1915 to Zinfandel. It's own rooted. It's interesting, the mix out in the vineyard, it's primarily Zinfandel, and then there's Carignan, but there's also a good chunk of Mondoux Noir, which is from the Savoie and the French Alps, kind of just below the Jura region and east of Burgundy, which is a fascinating thing that, you know, that vine wound up in Eastern Lodi in 1915. There's also a couple dozen Senso vines out there, and that's about it. There's a couple white table grapes out there that were probably planted for snacks. For a pre-Prohibition piece, it's actually somewhat large. I think most pre-Prohibition pieces the plantations are usually 10 acres or under 10 acres. What's Marion's 8 and change?
8.3.
8.3. So it's 15. The plot's a 20-acre plot. It's 15 acres of old vines, and then it was 4 acres of English walnuts. And in 1989, Alan Kirschman ripped out the English walnuts, and he planted 4 acres of Zinfandel on trellis. And then, from what I believe, the next year, half of that he grafted over to Pinot Grigio. And I believe it was one of the earliest Pinot Grigios out in Lodi. And Alan farmed the vineyard until 2004 when he passed away. And I actually met Alan and was introduced to the vineyard in 2004 by Marcus Bokish, who he's, you know, kind of the Iberian, he and Liz are Iberian king and queen of Lodi. And Marcus had introduced Turley to Lodi with a vineyard that is also owned by Greg Burns that is now called the Royal Tea Vineyard. That Turley made that in 96 and 97. And Marcus had actually, we were buying Grenache Budwood from Marcus in 2004. And I came out to pick it up from Marcus's house. And Marcus said, I said, what are those old vineyards down the road? And he said, oh, my neighbor owns some of them. We should go check them out. So we went down and we met up with Ross, and he showed me his vineyard that they call the Dairy Vineyard, planted in 1918. And that's Mike Mckay actually bought part of that. And then I met Alan Kirschman, who was sick at the time. And, we kind of checked out the site. And then in 2008, we started buying from Ross Schmid, his old patch of Zinfandel. And it really kind of blew my mind. The first year we made it, we'd been making the Dogtown Vineyard since 1997. And it was fun having both the Schmid Zinfandel, which is right next door to Kirschman, and Dogtown in the cellar, because they were such different wines. Dogtown is traditional Clements Hills, clay and gravel soils and iron-rich soils, and then Schmid's very, sandy. The way they talk about the Mokelumne River AVA is it's, Tokay fine sandy loam, but there's some sandy loam and there's some loamy sand. And I think this is more, this is sand, and it's white chalky sand. But the first year that we tried the wine, I remember trying out a barrel, and I thought I pulled the wrong sample because it tasted so different than the Dogtown wine. And that really, sparked an interest in me to, seek it out. And then, 4 years later, I was able to buy the neighbor's vineyard.
And you got to make own rooted wines. So
Got to make own rooted wines.
And own your own rooted vineyard, which is a true treat.
The neat thing about the size of this vineyard is that we get to, with Turley, I make multiple passes through it. So the wine that we taste is actually, it's from 3 different picks. So we kind of pick, one that's maybe around 14% alcohol, one that's around, high 14s, and one that's, close to 16. And then we blend all 3 of them together. And I really love the complexity you get from, it's a pretty, flat vineyard. So I think, when you look at it, it's neat to get complexity over picking multiple times than just picking all of it at once. And the fun thing is we sell to, I think we sell to 7 other people, and they pick at all different times. Some people pick earlier than we pick the first time, and some people want to be the last to pick. And, it's a real treat to try other people's wines, even if their style is not exactly what I'm looking for. If you're open-minded enough, there's something to learn tasting another person's wines. Like, I wouldn't do that. And then you're like, wow, that wine's actually really good. So.
Yeah, Zinfandel can present itself in many different ways depending on how you approach it. And I think what's interesting is some of the styles that are being done with these now. Another question for you though, too. I think, you were a winemaker first and now you're a vineyard owner second. How has your perspective changed as now that you're actually farming your own vineyard as an owner, as it relates to, the bigger picture of what you do?
I'm not there yet, but I think there are a lot of vineyard owners I need to go and apologize to. So, I think the thing is you start to think of, you're trying to make good decisions, but you're also trying to, not have it be a charity project. So it's kind of, I don't have the money for it to be a charity project. So clearly, like, I want it to deliver the best quality fruit that I can. And there have been times I've definitely put that in front of, the quality in front of decisions that were probably smart to make as a grower. But, I'm looking at it in the long, I'm trying to play the long game. It's a 15-year loan on the property, and we're already, 8.5 years, almost 9 years through it. And, I can kind of see the finish line. And, I think that's one of the things that some old growers have an advantage of, is not having a mortgage on a property. Like, you have more freedom to do certain passes. The crazy thing is we don't spray any Roundup. We've never sprayed any Roundup in the vineyard since we've owned it. The most expensive thing that we do is shovel weeds. It costs like 2 to 3 times the cost of pruning the vineyard, to go through and shovel the weeds. And, most of all the people I sell fruit to, they want it. I want it at Turley. I want it for my own wine. And, you know what, it's a shocking bill to get every year. But then at the end of the day, when you look at the farming costs, you kind of forget about it. You taste the wine and everything's good. So yeah, I think, you know, the question is about what you're asking to be done in the vineyard and does it make sense? And I think with open conversations with, you know, growers, you know, there have been times we've offered to pay for passes, you know, if we want fruit dropped or if something's off that we think we're asking above and beyond the norm, we'll say, send us the bill for that. You know, we can help out. And I think, you know, I know you and I, you know, that's one of the things to do. Like all of these wines that we're tasting are going for really nice prices, you know, for California wines. They're $25 probably to $40 a bottle. And, you know, there's money for the wineries to pay for the attention that we've come to expect for these old vineyards. So, you know, the one thing I all the grape growers out there is, you know, don't be afraid to ask, you know, the wineries for a little bit more money. You know, I think people treasure these things. And, you know, I can tell you this, and Kevin and Jeff, I mean, everyone can tell you, I mean, since we've farmed all of these vineyards, I don't think anyone's had their farming costs go down. You know, I mean, every year farming costs go up. Unfortunately, it's like you get stuck on this escalator and you don't really see, you know, a get off point, and you're just kind of climbing up, and every year farming goes up. And, you know, I know for the fruit that we buy, you know, the last couple of years through the drought, a lot of our growers raised the prices a little bit. And being a farmer myself, you can be like, I see that, I understand it, like I get it. It's not like you're trying to, you know, buy another vacation house in like Santa Cruz or something. You know, you're you know, you're actually doing it because, you know, you understand that, you know, you're asking, you know, farming everywhere that Turley's worked and I've worked. And I think everyone here can say this, like the last 10, 15 years in California viticulture throughout all of California qualitatively has continued to go up. I mean, what was passable, you know, and I mean, Kevin, what was passable when you guys started, you know, with Seven Deadly Zins to what would be passable now, it's probably pretty night and day, right? I mean, what you would go and say, like the farmer would say, looks good, right? You'd be like, absolutely not. And a lot of people say, well, it looked good 10 years ago. And it's like, well, I know times have changed. You know, it's more competitive. You know, consumers demand more consistent quality. And, you know, I think us as grape growers and wine farmers, we know what it takes to get there, and it's not free.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you just, you know, I'll give you one data point, and that's just the cost of harvesting has gone up probably since, you know, we bought the vineyard in 12, 13 was our first vintage. It's probably up to at least double, if not triple what it was in our very first year. And we've never raised our prices from that first year. So just to kind of echo back to what Tegan's saying, it's less and less returns as time goes by.
Yeah, so a couple of questions coming in. First, I want to throw this one to Tegan, and because not everyone that's watching us actually has the wines in front of us. So they want to know, how do you describe flavor-wise your Kirschenmann Vineyard Zinfandel?
Well, so I get a lot of spice in the nose. I get like a dark cherry, kind of a black cherry. I get more of a, you know, kind of black tea aromatic. I definitely get some more savory notes, but I mean, there's fruit and there's acid. This is one of our better, the finished pH on this wine with no acid added, I think it's 3.61. You know, it's picked around 3.4 or so, and it went up a little through malolactic. And, you know, I think it's, you know, it's interesting because there's a lot of fruit in it, but it's not a fruit bomb. There's a lot of other things besides fruit in the wine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a delicious wine, and consistently, you know, since you've been working with it, it's delivering.
I will say, I think it is a good representation of East Side Lodi. You know, it's kind of, it's more than fruit. It's spicier. It's a little more structured. you know, I think the 16 right now is in a really perfect spot for this vineyard. Like it's really evolved.
Yeah, I think we're going to get to the last one we're having is the M2 Susi Vineyard, which I think is a very good representation of a West Side vineyard. And this definitely is a representation of the East Side. Kevin, one of the questions that's come in is you know, we're talking about Bechtel and being buyers, and Tegan has multiple buyers in his vineyard, and Jeff does too. Is that a direction for Lodi in these old vineyards, that you're going to need to bring in multiple wineries in order to kind of make them work from a grower's perspective?
You know, I'm not sure, you know, I mean, I was ecstatic when I found out about the Save the Old Vine campaign from the Winegrape Commission. And, you know, we've been, I've had this model with the Bechtel Vineyard now for, you know, for about 12 years. I mean, basically since we took it over, and it's continued to expand, you know, and I don't know that it's right for everybody, but it is a path forward. It is a model to, you know, to look at. And, you know, and it might not be for everybody, but, you know, one thing I would tell, you know, any Lodi grower is, you know, look at the size of your block and try to match that size of your block and the style of your block and the personality of yourself with the right winery. I mean, I forget what it is now. I mean, 3,000 wineries or something just in California, but you know, growers don't inherently market themselves, and it's a tough prospect, and it's daunting to a lot of people. But if you can market yourself to the right, you know, to the right fit, even if you have a 3 acre, you know, you have a little 2-3 acre vineyard, well, you know, go look for that, you know, 2,000, 3,000 case winery, and then that can be the right fit. You know, something like Bechtel, it's 25 acres, so you're not going to find a lot of wineries that are going to want to absorb that kind of a quantity of fruit. And so we've gone down this path of, you know, almost by default of bringing in more and more buyers. You know, I mean, for us, it's more of a matter of sharing this vineyard. I mean, it's so special. We want to share it with other wineries. There's a lot of wineries that buy Bechtel that they don't buy anything else from Lodi. And so it's kind of cool to see these wineries that they're putting Lodi on the label. They're putting the Bechtel Senso as a single vineyard source on the label, you know, and it might be the only thing they have, but it helps market, you know, it helps market Lodi. But I think it is a path forward. I don't know if it's the only path forward, you know, and I would still say, you know, try to pick, you know, try to align yourself with the right vineyard based on your block. But if you do have a larger block, you know, it probably is a pretty decent model to look at. So
we've got 2 more wines to discuss here, and the next wine we're going to come up to is the 2017 Clinker Brick Rouser Vineyard Carrigan or Carillon. And this vineyard actually sits almost really close to Tegan's vineyard.
It's directly north. It's right across the Schmied Road from.
Yeah. And planted in 1909, owned by Jeannie Rouser and her family for quite some time. And I think there is not as much old vine Carrigan in Lodi, but there are a number of these old plots sitting out there that are really starting to be discovered and making some delicious wines. And I think the Clinker Brick is an absolute good representation of that. And they're doing wonderful things with it. This is the vineyard there. That's Steve Felton of Clinker Brick, and Joseph Smith, their winemaker, who is actually, I think, from Belize, which is pretty amazing to see a Belizean winemaker in Lodi. But he's been working with them for a number of years. And you can see this, Steve's also not, you know, 4'2", so you can see the size of these vines are somewhat significant as well, too. Tegan and I were just talking about Carrigan before we got started today, and maybe you want to share a little bit about your thoughts on Carrigan and Lodi.
Well, I think the first thing is it is the second most planted old vine source in Lodi, and it does really well. Just to quickly touch base on the Clinker, the Rouser Carignan, it's a really most Carignan that you see is pretty much all Carignan, and 100%. And a lot of it was planted during or post-Prohibition. This was a pre-Prohibition vineyard, and it actually has a lot of Alicante Bouschet and Grand Noir interplanted in the Carignan patch, which is very rare to see in California. And there's also some Zinfandel interplanted too. So again, most Carignan vineyards would actually be something in a field blend. This is actually a field blend that's predominantly Carignan, but I think Carignan's secret to blends, one, it's historically a heavier producer, and it doesn't make great wine when it's overcropped or younger vines. So Lodi has this great source of old vine Carignan, and it holds its acidity really well. I guess the one issue is if people want those 26, 27 brick sugars, Carignan rarely gets there, or if it gets there, it starts to lose its acid. But Carignan historically in places in the south of France and northern Spain can be classified as a rough or coarse wine. And I think the sandy loam soils of Lodi really help Carignan. I think it's some of the better Carignan in the world. I know that's wild to say, but it's just this like supple, really pretty, but dark colored wines with good acidity. And I think there's a lot of potential for, again, as Kevin said, the problem is a lot of the patches of Carignan are, 20 plus acres. And if they're getting 4 or 5 tons the acre, it's hard to find a winery to pay, $2,000 or $1,500 a ton for, 200 tons of fruit. It's a lot easier with people who want to make 125, 250 cases of, old vine Carignan to pay the prices that then allow the grower to farm the vineyard how, in theory, an old historic vineyard should be farmed. So I think, there are more and more, and, Gallo's a great example of someone who, historically bought a lot of the Carignan out in Lodi, and it went into, Hardy Burgundy. They had a lot of, patches, and some of those vineyards have become, open. The Spankers right around the corner from Bechtel have an old patch of 1900 Carignan. The Shins have another vineyard called Mule Plain down the road to the north. There's some really neat old Carignan plots in Lodi, and I think it's one of, the next things, we all wish there were like 7 Bechtel vineyards in Lodi, but there just aren't. And, but there are, more old vine Carignan vineyards that, hopefully people will start to, showcase, what Lodi can do with Carignan.
Kevin, are you guys doing an old vine Carignan?
We go off and on with a historic family vineyard, the Bishopberger Vineyard. It was planted by, I think it was a great grandfather on my grandmother's side back in I think it was 32. I'm trying to remember exactly, but
36.
It's a vineyard that we have sourced. We've continuously sourced for a long time, and we make it as a wine club exclusive. Every couple of years it seems like. But it is the only representation of Carignan that we have in the entire winery. And you might have just caught me slip there. I said Carignan because that is kind of that's the old school Lodi way of saying it. Even though the Frenchies and Tegan, they like to say Carignan, but us old growers, we just say Carignan.
Well, one grower out in Mendocino told me when we were selling Carignan, it was, $500 a ton. Then it went up to $750. We called it Carignan. And then people came in and started wanting to call us Carignan and sell it for $1,000 a ton. So we called it whatever they wanted us to call it. But it is one of those neat things. I do believe Carignan is a really neat pronunciation of the grape, because there's so many people, East Coast wine people, who say, you're pronouncing it wrong. That's not how it's pronounced. And I'm like, you support local dialects of grapes and wine everywhere else in the world, except here in California. So I'm like, you go and, if you go into an old Carignan grower's field and try to tell him he's pronouncing a vineyard wrong that his family's grown for 120 years, you're the one who's wrong, not him. Dialects are the beauty of the wine world. And, you know, I think it's one of the cool things that California has. It has its own name for Kerrigan.
So the grower should throw out a great price depending on how the winemaker pronounces it to him when he calls him up. Yeah. But Tegan, let me ask you this. I've heard some winemakers, sorry to ask a question, Stuart, but I've heard some winemakers call when Kerrigan is interplanted with Zinfandel kind of like secret sauce in some field blends. Do you find that to be true?
I think yes and no. I mean, I think if you look historically in like Sonoma Valley is a great area to look historically because there's a real division. So if you go past, you know, Russian River to the north, you start in the warmer areas of Sonoma, you start to find a lot of interplanted Kerrigan, and up into Mendocino because it's hot, and the Zinfandel in those areas actually would lose its acidity. So the Carignan would help out a lot to, you know, keep the wines fresh. Where if you go into Russian River Valley, you find a lot more Petit Syrah historically that would add color to those wines. You know, when things were being picked in late October, early November, you know, they were still lighter, so they would add Petit Syrah. So, I mean, it clearly was something that was being used. So, I mean, Russian River growers would call Petit Syrah secret sauce, and some, you know, Napa growers would too. But I think all old vine Zinfandel can use a little bit of Kerrigan, even if it's just to see, you know, to spot for mildew. You know, it definitely is more prone to mildew than most grapes we grow. So it's like, if you want to be a lazy grower and a flip-flop farmer, you get out of your truck, you go to a Kerrigan vine and look through it to see if it's clean from mildew. If it is, you get back in your truck and drive away. You know, you don't really have to, if the Kerrigan doesn't have mildew, the Zinfandel doesn't. So, you know, and that's kind of one of those ways to look at it. But yeah, no, I think it's, you know, there's a reason it was planted, and growers loved it because it historically probably yields almost twice as much as Zinfandel.
Yeah, you can never dismiss the yield factor in why vineyards are in certain places and grown. And historically, a grower is going to grow what grows well. And Kerrigan did, and we're fortunate still to have some of these old vineyards here in Lodi to make these wines. So we're going to move on to the final wine of the evening, which is the M2 Susi Vineyard, planted in 1916. This is an own-rooted vineyard out here on the very west side of Lodi. You can see the freeway from it. Extremely sandy soils in this vineyard, and I think Kevin, I think you guys sourced grapes from here previously too for Michael David, back when you were buying 70 Deadly Zins, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I have quite a bit of experience with the Susi Vineyard with Kevin Susi himself, and it's you know, it's a great block. This is a classic representation of the Susi Vineyard, and you know, I mean, there's one thing when it comes to the Susi Vineyard that it's just very, besides the flavor profile and stuff, of all vineyards in Lodi, I mean, this is possibly the most immaculate vineyard in all of Lodi. I mean, I would eat on the berms here, hands down. I mean, way before my own kitchen floor. I mean, it's very, very clean. Kevin is an extremely tidy grower. You know, I gave him you know, I used to have grower awards, and you know, when we have things, and you know, I would give him hemorrhoid cream every year because he's such a pain in the ass. You know, I mean, it's just, Kevin is just, he's very unique. He's a very, very immaculate grower, but he does an amazing job with these vines. And there's a consistency that comes out of this vineyard and the flavor profile that, you know, I mean, you're going to taste if you, you know, if the viewers are tasting along with us. I mean, there's just this big brambly blackberry flavor that goes with this wine. There, you know, there's some black pepper that goes with it. I mean, and this is classic Susi. I mean, of all the wines that we have here, I mean, there's no wine like this one that just, to me, screams home. This is my backyard. I've always had a big affinity and love for the West Side Lodi Zins, and Turner Road, which is where this one is located, has historically always been my favorite location. And so, the Susie block, it just kind of, it epitomizes how I feel about West Side Lodi Zin.
Yeah, I would agree. This is a very distinctive wine. To me, it always stands out, and it's kind of easy to pick out too. And I would concur about Kevin in his farm. He is very meticulous. Every ranch you go to has a junk pile, every farm. And Kevin's junk pile he's got the neatest junk pile of anyone you will ever find. It's all neatly stacked and organized. And I can't say that about everyone. So in this picture, you can see we have 8-foot winemakers in Lodi as well as 3-foot winemakers. And this is Lane Montgomery of M2 Wine Vineyards, who's been working with this vineyard, I think, almost 20 years. He first started out as a home winemaker back in the day. And then I think his first commercial vintage was about 2003 or 2004. And he's been doing Susie Vineyards as single vineyard wine all those years. So I think Lane understands the vineyard extremely well and does a fabulous job of bringing this wine to life in his own style and representation.
And Stuart, if you can, or Jenny can go back, I think that last photo is a great photo to kind of think about the trajectory of, head training vines in Lodi. So you remember kind of what the Senso looked like, and then you remember what the Trulux looked like. And then this, to me, represents more kind of traditional head training in California and in Lodi. So I think it's a really nice, it's not that Lane is that tall.
He is pretty tall, though.
It's just the more traditional head trained vine. And I think it speaks kind of to that era of 1916 when, you started getting people that knew a little bit more maybe about traditional viticulture, planting vines and training vines.
Well, and the neat thing about this is, Kevin farms it now, and his father farmed it before him, and his grandfather, I think, planted it way back then. And so it's really been in the family all that time, and Kevin's a great caretaker for it. Well, good. I want to thank you guys all for joining us here today. These wines are all tasting great. I think they're fabulous representations. And I think, a few of the things that are important to keep in mind is, these old vines are heirlooms that are worth taking care of. And we need, customers across the world that appreciate them and seek them out. And so hopefully this will pique people's interest to come. But before we go, I want to offer each of you a moment to kind of reflect on that, and say, why should people care about these old vines, not just from a grower perspective, but obviously from the consumer and from the wine professional's perspective. And I'm going to start with you, Jeff.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to kind of hit upon what you said, and that is that as time goes on, these vineyards are becoming more and more increasingly rare out there. And, of course, it's kind of a cliched adage, but, once they're gone, they're gone. And so we want future generations to be able to experience, these wines and these places that they're grown on and the people that grow them. And so, I think we here on the panels and many people out there in our community and other communities really do value these heirlooms that we have, either whether they've been in the family for years or whether they haven't. And at the end of the day, every mortal person has, only so many dollars that they can invest in buying wine. And so, when you vote, you vote with your values, I believe. Right. And so, personally, we all like to drink champagne and the wines of the world, and they're delicious and they're great, and they're vehicles to travel to these places that we love. But, at the end of the day, where I try to spend most of my money is, wine dollars at least, is, people that I value, people whose efforts I value, and old wines, because they're very important to me. And I try to pass that back, to those people to support those efforts. And we hope that others will support us in that fashion.
Kevin, you have some thoughts, final thoughts?
Well, I mean, Lodi is a special place, and there is a lot of old vine vineyards here, but they are unfortunately shrinking. I mean, and I mean it goes beyond the winemakers and the wine communities of California to to save these, because if we had all 3,000 wineries in in California make an old vine Lodi, well, that could actually happen. There's probably enough fruit that we can do that out to a certain extent, but we need the consumer to actually be able to appreciate it, to understand it, and to enjoy it. I mean, this is a tall order. I mean, and we all have a responsibility, I think, to do everything in our power to preserve these things. This is living history, and it's a really cool thing. I mean, and for any winemakers out there, sommeliers, anybody that's interested in this world, in terms of making old wines, I mean, I'm going to say, get in touch with me. I've had so much experience and so much interaction with the Lodi growers. I mean, there's very few that I don't know, and this is something I would just happily do. I would happily put you in touch with anybody. If you tell me what you think you're looking for, what you're looking for, what you want, I do that just because I love these things and I want them to stay, and I would do everything in my part to be able to make that happen. So it's easy to get in touch with me. Just ask Tegan, and I believe me, I want to do my part to the maximum extent. So please, support Lodi Old Vine in any way you can.
Good. Tegan, so your final thoughts.
Well, I think it comes down to that it's, Lodi has a really valuable resource of old vines. It's got once they're gone, they're gone. And I think the neatest thing about Lodi is, if you look at the price point, I mean, it's really fascinating that you can taste California wine. And I mean, I think all of these wines, the one thing, like, these wines are from California. They're not from France. They're not trying to be from France. Even the Sensos, to me, taste of the California sunshine. And I think that's the thing. If you talk about California wine, I mean, I love the great California Chardonnays and I love great California Cabernets, but guess what? You can get those in France. And you can't get wines like this anywhere else in the world. And specifically to Zinfandel, like, if you want to taste what California tastes like, go and, taste the Lodi Zinfandel, because that is primarily where old vine Zinfandel is in California. And it more than anywhere, it really captures California's sunshine. We've got the Delta breeze. It's just kind of a perfect combination. And it's something where, you might not drink it every single night, but it's also not a bottle that you kind of only bring out to show your friends because it costs $200 a bottle. You bring it out to pour it for your friends and they go, wow, where is that from? You're like, that's Lodi Zin, or that's Lodi Senso. And people usually are pretty mind blown. And then they're like, how, it's only $30 a bottle? No, it's actually 28. And they're like, wow, I can't believe it. And I think, it's one of the last places in California where you can get truly world-class individual wines that are, reasonably priced. And I think, as long as people start to understand that these wines are reasonably priced and they get to know them, I think more and more people will start to seek out old vines from Lodi.
Very well said. I couldn't say it any better myself. Thank you, Tegan, for that glowing endorsement of Lodi and old vines and Zinfandel too. And so my final thoughts, I'm going to ask one more favor of Kevin tonight, is to share his screensaver with us. We want to make sure we're keeping this in the COVID era, and Kevin grabbed his computer that his daughter had been on, and before the session we got started, him and his wife were running around crazy trying to figure out how to fix this. And are you getting it, Kevin? Now he can't figure out how to bring it back, but suffice it to say, now he blacked himself off. Kevin had a picture of his cat wearing a costume in the background. And I guess it was for Halloween that his daughter had put the Zoom screen. There you go. So this is what happens in the COVID era when your kids are on your computers and you end up with in costumes for your Zoom personal profile. And for Kevin, it's very fitting for those that know him here in Lodi. We couldn't think of a better background for him. So
Tiger King.
thank you all for joining us this evening, and thank Kevin, Tegan, and Jeff for helping out. And I know we ran a little long, and hopefully everyone stayed in touch with us, but we will be back again sometime. And if anyone wants to come to Lodi and discover these wonderful wines, you're always welcome here. Just feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to have you. Thank you again, and good night.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Kevin. We will see you guys back here in Lodi, or see you soon, hopefully. So.
You got it. Thanks for having me again.
No, it went a little long, but hopefully people were still watching. But it was hard to cut it short. So.
Yeah, it's so it looked like actually for the first hour we were holding pretty steady between like 90 and 95 viewers.
Wow.
The high was about 100, and then the low was about 75.
Yeah, towards the end.
It's pretty high. We got like quite a few comments like going.
Yeah.
So.
Good,
Oh,
good.
cool.
So it went okay, you think, huh?
Yeah. No,
Yeah, it
good.
went really well.
We earned our money tonight.
Yeah.
This is actually our job. You're just here as a free. So.
I earned my dinner tonight. How about that?
Yeah, no, it was good. Thanks.
No,
Appreciate
thanks,
it.
guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for including me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate your
Thank
support.
you.
Yeah, anytime.
I was telling the girls down the road, I think it would be fun to do something that is a Stampede Vineyard only thing, where you have like 4 or 5 different wines from the vineyard, and whether we do it in the visitor center as a promotion or do some sort of online thing, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, especially like you got to get enough people to make senior vineyard
He's back.
wines. Yeah, you're on mute, but man, if you had blonde hair.
I was just telling Kevin. Kevin's like still here. Like.
He's got 6 bottles of wine. He's not going anywhere.
Now.
He doesn't want to go home. His kids may put that costume on him.
Oh man. Hey Jeff, I gotta say, man, I really, really liked this wine that the Maitre de Chat guys made. It's a great representation, and it's such a twist from from Lodi's Inn. I mean, the acidity is amazing. It's a wine that I was really, really pleased to try. It's something I've never had experience with before. So.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think I really love, especially the 18 that they made is probably my favorite representation of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a great year as well, but I think we really nailed, I mean, every year we're trying to, you know how it is, you're trying to do more and more with less and less in farming, right? The weather was great. We nailed the pick, and they did a really, really good job. I really like it. Yeah.
Was this the one that was written up in the New York Times too?
They did the 17, and I really wish he had tried I thought the 18. I think the 18 is tasting much better than the 17. And the 17 is fine, but the 17 is like at 14.1 alcohol, and I think this one's at 12.9. I don't have the bottle in front of me, but it's in the high 12s.
So it was a drastic difference between one vintage to the next, like
the pick date. I mean, 17 was hot. Yeah, I mean, they wanted to pick it a little bit earlier. They thought they'd be able to hit their target a little bit earlier. Like the first year they made wine from our vineyard was in 14, and it came in at 12.9 also. And then 15, we just had this, I don't know if you remember, we had like this heat spike of like 105 degrees for like 3 days, and everything just went to hell. And so that one came in like around 15. So the last few years, 18, 19, and 20, we've been really trying to hone in at that 22 to 23 ish is when we pick it. And I think it turned out great. There's plenty of tannin in the wine because that site gets tannin and it's unrooted, and we don't irrigate. You know, we have some young vines in there. We irrigate a little bit now just for a couple hours, you know, once a week, but that's it. Really, the vineyard gets no irrigation until I do what you do. I just do at the end of the year, post harvest, I give it a really good drink. But other than that, we pretty much dry farm it. Even the young vines, we, if you go out to the vineyard, we stuck in drip irrigation tube about a foot into the ground and ran a spaghetti tube down in so that the water would go straight to the root system. And that way we don't have to water for like 6 hours to get water on the young vines. So all the young vines have got this kind of makeshift poor man's second drip irrigation line. But yeah, we do it just so we don't have to irrigate the old vines that much. They get a couple hours a week. It's noise to them.
Oh, well, it's this, I don't know. I was really happy with this wine, really pleased with this wine. And it really evolved over a little bit of time too. I mean, I had it yesterday and it tasted a certain way out of the bottle. And then a couple hours later, it tasted a certain way. And now, you know, a day later, it tastes, you know, it's evolving just as being open, but there's such a nice, beautiful acidity that goes with it, but you still capture that dustiness of the terroir. I love it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So Kevin,
And I remember Alex very well, you know, from his days of interning with Scolium.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Well, he was the assistant. He was the assistant up until I think 2 years ago. But Scolium now, I think I happened to see Abe just a few weeks ago. It was his first time in, I think, Northern California in like a year. Like he took no fruit from Northern California this year, all from his like LA project that he's doing now, right? Because he was traveling with Raj Parr, and then Raj said, well, what happened to your allocation of Bechtel? I said, aren't you at least taking Bechtel? Like that'd be like the one vineyard you never give up your allocation of, right? And he says, I have no idea who got it this year. So yeah. And I think that's like his best wine. Honestly, I think that's the best wine he's made.
Some of them it's one of the least weird wines he makes.
Yeah.
So I was gonna.
That Bechtel evolved in such a weird way. You know, I mean, he used to have a white wine that was made with the Bechtel Vineyard. You know, I mean, it was like he did such goofy stuff, but he actually kind of went back to mainstream with it eventually.
The rhododactylon, right? Was like that's delicious. Oh, yeah, he made two wines, yeah, and they're I think his best wines. Sorry, we cut off Jenny.
What were you gonna say, Jenny?
Oh, no, I was gonna say Mike Dunn was on this tasting and he specifically commented that Kevin gets the award for the best beard on Zoom.
Can I have him as my background? Can I have that?